It's always a good start. Welcome to Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee on Monday the 18th of October 2021. I'm standing in for Councillor Aston as chair, and I believe we have some other substitutes. So we've got Councillor Eyre substituting for Councillor Ashton. So first item of the agenda is declarations of interest. Anyone, any declarations of interest on matters before us? Can't see any. Councillor Hook?
The only possibility is the committee change. I'm on, well, I'm one of the changes on the committees. For item
I don't think that's a problem, is it? That's fine. Okay, so item 2, exclusion of press and public. That is in relation to item 10 and 11, which are conveniently put towards the bottom of the agenda. So I propose when we reach that point on the agenda, we will go into private session. Is that acceptable to everybody? Yeah, agreed. Thank you. And item 3 is a minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of September 2021. Does anyone have any corrections, or are you happy for me to approve? Not see anyone wants to say anything on these, in which case I'm happy to approve the minutes. Sure, I wasn't sharing, I'll sign. Yeah. That's that item. Item 4, public participation. I believe from our residents, it is when Swinburne, you want to speak to us, so you have 3 minutes to address us.
Thank you, Chair. I will be in time. Okay. Members, as we know, there have been embarrassing and unresolved difficulties regarding proportionality on the Council's committees. As the Constitution is being updated, so far with zero public consultation, may I ask that in future, as soon as possible after the election and before the annual Council, the statutory officers provide a full written and explained proportionality proposals to be presented, I think, to the Standards Committee for their input and decision, to include all those outside bodies and TechR businesses. It will actually give us some light on that process, which has been in the dark. Then, as needed during the course of the year, any proportionality changes proposed be submitted there first. Places allocated to the committee mid-year obviously will continue as you do here. That's my suggestion anyway. It allows an extra check and balance, Chair. I would also ask that the entirety of the Lord Mayor's allowances and costs be submitted each year as part of the budget to a relevant committee. So far, these are opaque and staff are directed, subject to staffer whims, which is inappropriate for the Lord Mayoralty. Let there be light. The Public Interest Report, Chair. Please can the officer be directly asked to answer these 2 questions. Are there any recommendations from Audit and Governance Committee that have not been taken on board in their entirety? If so, which? Secondly, do these processes conform in every regard with the statutory processes and guidance? Yes or no is fine. Regarding the delegations, Chair, the Chief Operating Officer needs to be constrained by a limited delegation for payouts without member approval. 20,000 max would be my wish, and all discretions to be agreed by this committee or clearance from both leader and executive member, not just the executive member. We need this assurance in view of the track record of each of our statutory officers. They cannot be trusted with more. The leader is required by statutory guidance to sign off every special severance payment. This is not reflected here and needs to be corrected immediately. Finally, Chair, on the redundancy report, the anonymised amount for each employee is a comfort. As these have been hidden to date, will you ask, or shall I FOI for a similar report for the last 2 financial years, We need to know by grade and department the quantum of statutory and non-statutory exit payments, including pension strain. Thank you, Chair. I'll send you the notes round.
Thank you very much for your comments, which will be noted by the committee. Thank you. That takes us then to item 5, which is the exit strategies paper, guidance on the use of settlement agreements, including special severance payments, page 5 to 46.
Thank you, Chair. So this agenda item 5 brings to you the guidance for exit strategies that has been through audit and governance. So I don't plan on going through it in full detail, so I'll just highlight some of the main points for you to pick up on. So this is a result of the report in the public interest from April that went through full council. And this covers a few of the recommendations that are within that. As I said, audit and governance, we've been to audit and governance on the 8th and 29th of September with these documents, and recommendations for changes that were made at audit and governance have been made. So in response to Ms Swinburne's comments. We have said in summary there that once this is agreed, we will start training on it. Just for clarity, I've already carried out training with the leading together, so heads of service and above, and the HR team as well. So on this document, obviously, if there's any changes, then that training will be, those staff will be contacted again with any changes. The document around the pay discretions that is included in here is part of the constitution review, so there's still time to amend that, and that's pulling it all together, but I'll cover that as we go through. On to page 6 then. What I'm asking staff in matters and urgency to do at this committee is to approve the guidance at Annex A, that the head of HR will then liaise with executive and corporate management team to ensure that the consistent compliance with that governance, that guidance and the training of key officers. And as I've just said, that some of that training has already taken place. And to note the pay discretions presented in the Annex Appendix 2. Obviously, you can choose not to accept the recommendation contained within the report, but to do so would hinder the Council's ability to comply with the public interest report and the action plan that was agreed with that. I won't take you through the background. I think probably everybody is aware of the background and why it's here. Excuse me, just for confirmation on consultation, the trade unions have been consulted on the guidance and any changes were fed into that, as well as we took legal advice on the documentation and obviously audit and governance, as I've already referred to. Just a paragraph 14, just for clarity, we have taken and had feedback now from internal audit, and that has been incorporated both into the exit strategy document and onto the pay discretions. I'll take just going on to the exit strategy guidance then, just to take us through what some of the key bits were and where we're coming from. So within the first page was to clarify the definitions. So I think some of the feedback was definitions weren't clarified and was all to be working on one set of definitions. So that's been included in there for reference. It does cover, it is based on guidance and statutory processes as they are at the time. Obviously, we're all aware that some of that does change and will be reflective. So if any changes in this document are needed in future, then they will come back and feed back into this meeting. It takes us through the detail of the special severance payments, and underpinning all this is that they should be by exception. They are not run of the mill, they are not kind of standard process and procedure. And that to do so in this document then takes us through a lot more detail about how to get that approved and what information is provided in the business case for those decision makers to base their decision on, bringing back in the value for money and our best value duty as an authority. It does set out then at 3.9 in a sense of what this guidance is there to do, and that the council's view is that special severance payments do not usually represent value for money. So that's kind of underpinning to the whole guidance. The head of paid service, section 151 and monitoring officer must be there to approve it in the exceptional circumstances. It does go on in the document that where that's for a chief officer, so that's our assistant director level and above, that decision comes to this committee. Section 4 takes you through kind of reasons for leaving. So it's kind of an all-encompassing document that kind of gives you why people may leave the organisation. And then Section 5 detailing more around the special severance payment, because this is where the focus of the attention is and how that's all signed off. Taking you on to Section 6 is that CYC approval process. Again, back to this should be by exception. It shouldn't be seen as a soft option to any management processes, that this is by exception. The Chief Officer then would complete the business case, which is in Annex A to this document, which is a much more detailed business case than that was there previous. And just for the committee's reference, the previous process that was agreed through Staffing Matters and Audit and Governance back in 2019 is included at Appendix 3 for you, just for your reference. It would go through the relevant executive member and finance managers, HR, the head of paid service, chief officer and monitoring officer. What we have put in the business case as well is that internal audit will be notified as well whilst we're considering the business case, and external audit would be notified if that was for a chief officer as well. Not a decision-making body within that, but just for notification. Section kind of 6.7 onwards again goes through more of the detail that you'd want included in that, an overview of the department and key deliverables, much clearer on the employment and any contractual clauses relevant to it. So being very clear about what's contractual, what's statutory and what's that special severance payment. The business case and what's happened before that. So what's got us to this point? Why are we in the situation where a settlement agreement and a special severance payment is needed, key dates to that and the total cost of that exit payment. So again, separating all that out. The financial considerations in that business case would be around that best value duty being fulfilled. So more detail and more consideration around that, so the decision makers have all that information. There's there at section 6.12 as well around kind of the evidence given to the wider impact of the council of actually paying that, and does it set a precedent for future cases? Precedent even, not a president. And then other special kind of considerations, attempts at resolving any grievance, what else has happened, what the legal advice is and what legal advice has been taken, and the recommendations. I think I will leave it at that for the guidance, or just, sorry, I should say this, just in terms of monitoring it. So internal audit will be, so if one's made for a non-chief officer, it would come to this monthly meeting. So you would see it as you have done in previous cases for noting. Internal audit will also be sent that at the same time. Every 6 months, internal audit will do a review of them. Although from this guidance, there should be very few and far between. And once a year, internal audit will report back to audit and governance. So this committee will see them as and when they're occurring. This committee would make decisions on any chief officer ones, and internal audit will do a retrospective review 6 months and report that to audit and governance at the 12-month stage. Any questions?
Thank you. That's very welcome. People have questions. I'm sure there are questions. Do you want to start, Pete?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I've got quite a few, so I'm happy to sort of break them up and give the floor to others. I'm sure everybody's got questions that they want to ask. Thank you, Trudy. Thanks for the report. Just going through from section 3.6 and section 3.8 on page 15, in terms of when special severance payments could or should be made. I mean, I'm pleased to see that there in 3.6, because it does deal directly with the issues that were raised by the PIR report. It uses the same language, and of course, what this is about is learning the lessons of the PIR report to ensure that those things that happened wouldn't happen again. So I guess the test for that is, would those clauses at 3.6 or 3.8, where it talks about you shouldn't be using special severance payments to avoid unwelcome publicity or embarrassment, and that that any such clause should be proportionate and in the best interest of the whole council. Would this guidance have avoided the special severance payment being made to the previous chief exec?
I don't think I'm in a position to answer that question. I mean, obviously the guidance there going forward, it's for the decision makers at that time.
If I may, Chair. But look, given the point of the exercise really is to ensure that what happened last time doesn't happen again, that there isn't payments made out to avoid political embarrassment, shouldn't we be making sure that the new system that we have makes sure that that doesn't happen again? So shouldn't we be able to answer that question?
Can you concentrate on questions that the officer can answer rather than rhetorical questions?
With all due respect, Chair, it's not a rhetorical question. The purpose of the report is to ensure that we learn the lessons from the last PIR report and put in place systems that means that the same situation can't occur. I mean, if you prefer me to direct the questions to yourself, Chair, and you can answer them, that's fine. I don't really care who answers them as long as we get an answer.
Councillor
So to a question, would you agree that page 22, paragraph 6.13, 6.14, 6.15 are the key issues around here in terms of how you actually weigh that case up? Nobody can make a hypothetical on what decision would have been taken. What you can see quite clearly from those paragraphs there is that there would be a more robust analysis. And I think one of the things I found interesting was yes, you should spend huge amounts of legal fees on employment tribunals just to make a point, even if it costs more than the severance agreement. So I think those steps there are enough to make sure that you get a better, more robust decision.
Thank you.
So in a sense, this guidance that's come through, which is clearly very different from the Appendix 3, which was the guidance and business case before, is much more detailed. So in terms of the decision makers, there's more information in front of you in which to make your decision. And that case, in terms of it coming to staffing matters an agency for a chief officer, would be what you'd be basing that on.
So it certainly seems to me a lot more clarity, as you're saying, in terms of the process for different scenarios, depending on which officers are affected. Sorry, you want some more questions?
Like I say, Chair, I've got quite a few, but I'm happy to hand over at any point to people have other questions. I mean, let's just be, absolutely clear. Let's not brush the issue under the carpet. The reason that we're here is because this was handled so badly and potentially unlawfully last time, as the independent auditor's report says. So, we should be making sure we put in place a system that stops from happening again. So I think it's a reasonable test to ask whether or not this would have stopped that from happening last time. I don't think it's a rhetorical question. Just in terms of whether or not payment has been made to avoid unwelcome publicity, embarrassment, etc. Under this system, how would councillors know? How would we know? Because there was a lot of obfuscation around the reasons last time, but it took quite a long time to come into the public domain. In fact, it took the PIR report, really. How would we know at the time the decision's being made that it's not being made for the political purposes of the ruling administration?
So again, that would be through the business case, and this committee would be considering that business case. So you challenge and you answer those questions yourselves when you're considering the business case.
That's right.
I'm right in thinking you wouldn't actually know, because staffing matters and urgency would know, because it would be part of a confidential business case that went to staffing matters and urgency, the same as the confidential business case went on the previous occasion. The information wasn't present to members who made the decision, just that this is a more detailed version of it than was presented before. So, but it still wouldn't be in the public domain, that business case.
It wouldn't be in the public domain at the point of decision making, no. But I suppose the guidance in here is for the decision makers to go through some of that, to go, right, what are the wider scale implications of this, and actually have that discussion as part of that decision making.
Thank you.
But just to come back on that then, Councillor, so even under this process, we still wouldn't know the reasons why the council was looking to settle necessarily. So let's say, for example, because this process talks about using special severance payments to settle grievances, for example, is in there. Well, the grievance might not just be from the employee to the employer. It may be that somebody who is in the position of the employer may actually have a grievance against the individual and be looking to get rid of that individual. How would we know in this process whether or not the council taxpayers' money was being used to settle private grievances rather than for the reasons that are given outlined here, if we don't know the details? So if, for example, we haven't seen the tribunal papers, for example, or we haven't seen any of the allegations that may have been made, how would we know that the money was being spent properly?
That's what page 24 and page 25 are. I mean, that's the whole point, is all that information, if you read the paper, goes into the paper that goes to staffing matters and urgency, including, for example, external legal advice in terms of whether they believe the case is winnable or not winnable. All that information goes to staffing matters and urgency. So this committee will have all of that information, considerably more information than they had, which includes both the leader of the Labour group and the leader and deputy leader will all have that information when they make that decision.
Trudy, do you want to sort of add to that at all?
Yes, so I
Is
think
that what you understand?
so. Yes, I agree with that. So at 6.73, it says the business reasons for the proposed severance payment, e.g., to settle a grievance or employment tribunal.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be wrong, because I'd read the papers, but I didn't pick up that we would then at SMU have access to the tribunal allegations and the tribunal papers.
So you wouldn't necessarily have access to the tribunal papers if they've not been published, but there'd be that assessment and legal advice around what the tribunal claim was. So I'm not saying you would.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is that there would be information, confidential information from the legal advice, which summarised, but it wouldn't necessarily be I mean, obviously it depends on the rules of confidentiality around employment tribunals, which I don't know whether, if it's confidential information, then we wouldn't be able to consider that. Is that what you're saying?
So yes, so depending on the case, I mean, it's all difficult to say, isn't it, in a sense, because it depends on the circumstances at the time. But yeah, as a decision making at this committee, you'd need that information upon which to base your decision. So there would be some element of that. Now, whether that's the tribunal papers or not, or some element of that, then that was what you'd be expected to see within that business case. But I can't say you would have access to the tribunal papers because that's not in my gift to do that.
Okay.
But on top of that, according to this, you would have access to independent legal advice on how strong that tribunal case is, what the cost would be in terms of defending that tribunal and any potential liability, I mean, an estimate as much as it is, whether it's a 60, 40, 70, 30 and what the likely costs are in terms of that. And the guidance also, as I mentioned earlier, quite bizarrely, goes in favour of fighting the tribunal. If your legal advice is it's going to cost you £200,000 to fight it, but you will win, versus £50,000 in a settlement agreement, the advice is clear. You spend £200,000, £150,000 more than you have to go to the tribunal to win it. So,
Trading.
Just going to say yes.
Okay. Pete.
I mean, there's some interesting facts made up there about how much the tribunal case would cost and how much you would settle a case for plucked out of thin air. The reason that in the papers that it's, correct me if I'm wrong, that we would fight tribunal cases that we could win was because we don't want to set a precedent and we do not want people making vexatious claims against the council. I guess my concern is that without this committee having access to the full nature of the allegations, we won't necessarily know what is being settled. And this is an improvement on where we were previously, for sure, but it's not the full the full lot, because the council will be, if we're being taken to tribunal, the council will be in possession of those papers. So why wouldn't those papers be shared with this committee under this procedure?
So can I just clarify, do you have an alternative approach? I mean, I accept what you're saying is there's some challenges, but the question is there anything else more than what we've got in here that we could be doing, but we're not proposing?
Yeah, you could guarantee to share all legal documentation with the committee.
Nigel.
I'll probably come into Rachel. I mean, the problem we've got here is that you're talking about a specific case rather than actually judging this. I mean, 99 times out of 100, this is going to be about staff. And I don't think this committee would legally have a right to access an employee's complaint against another employee. That's not a matter for us to know the details of employed and paid staff. Am I correct in thinking that?
There's also legal aspects around that. I mean, it's a case by case basis. We don't know in the future which claims would go to a tribunal, and if anybody else were, for example, named in it, or anything else, any other aspect of a case, which means that it wouldn't be necessarily right to disclose it to anyone, including
So I
yourselves.
suppose the question really for Trudy is this the best process that we can put forward, which is all encompassing, that, you know, isn't we want to avoid fighting the last war, basically, don't we? We want to move on and have a policy which is appropriate and flexible enough to cater for a wide range of circumstances.
So I think this does that, and I think from the detail that's in here, where that information can be shared to that degree, then it would be shared. What we can't do is put a blanket in here that all tribunal documentation will be shared, because that's not my ability to do that. I think, and back to, if as a committee you haven't got the information upon which to make a decision, then you challenge that information and go where we want further information. But this details a lot further on what was there previous about what would be put in front of a committee to make that decision if it was the chief officer one specifically.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to move on, Pete?
Well, with all due respect, you might want to stop fighting
I'm just
the last war,
saying,
but that's entirely what this
Do you
is
want to
about.
ask some more questions?
And in response to Councillor Eyre, the reason that we're here is because of the last case, and the test is whether or not this process would have made that not the issue that resulted in us having a PIR. And I think, for me, I would say that there's no reason why that documentation couldn't be included. This committee looks at confidential information all the time. That's why press and public will be excluded later on. And if it's going to make a decision in the round, it needs to know what the allegations are that the employee is making that has arrived at a judgment to pay them a special severance payment.
Councillor.
Yeah, would it be possible to just make sure that if any tribunal in the future was a complaint about anyone who could possibly be at this table, that that person was then told that they couldn't attend this meeting? So that you then got a substitute or something like, oh, is it in there? Did I miss it? Sorry.
Nigel.
I mean, at the end of the day, you've had a legal opinion. It's a data protection issue. You cannot illegally disclose. We as members do not have a right to all information held by the council. That is through an information governance test. And to say this committee, your recommendation is this committee should have carte blanche to access any information regarding those things is just illegal, I would imagine, in most cases. The report summary there will give you as much information about that claim and the employment tribunal as can legally be given as part of that case. And if you're sitting there reading it, as could have happened in the past, any member of the committee doesn't, as Judy said, doesn't feel they have enough information, they can ask for it. They can say, no, we will adjourn this, we're not taking the decision, I want further information about that employment tribunal before we go ahead. And then you can put a freedom of information access request in, all of that can go through, and you will get all of the information you are legally entitled to. It's not our position here now to ask officers to break the law in terms of information governance, to give us information that we're not legally entitled to.
I think we've probably covered this point enough.
I would disagree, Chair, if I can respond to Councillor Eyre's point.
You can respond, but then can we have other questions?
Sure, yeah, I've got lots more questions. I mean, I think what I'm really alarmed to hear that you're being so defensive about being open and transparent. It's far from clear that any of the information that could be required to make a full judgment would be illegal to be disclosed to councillors who are in effect acting as the employers of all the staff within the council. But clearly, it's the message seems to be thus far and
I think
no further.
just on that point, Pete, I mean, we have professional officers here who are here to advise us. They've written this report. You know, they've got the qualifications after their name. We haven't. I depend on their advice as to what we can or can't legally disclose. And if this paper here actually sets that out, that's what we're here to consider.
The paper doesn't set that out. I'm asking for additional information to be made available.
Shady.
I'm not in a position to put in that all tribunal papers will be disclosed carte blanche in this guidance. I think it's on individual cases, and if as a committee you do not feel there's enough information upon which to make a decision on the individual case in front of you, then you as the committee can ask for more information at that time. But I'm not able to put that in. It has gone through a QC in terms of the guidance, so feel that it's where it is.
Okay, I think we've covered that point now, Pete. You want to move on?
Okay, thank you, Chair. In 3.10, the guidance doesn't cover schools. Who pays the money when there's a special severance payment? Is that paid from the council, or does it paid from the school's budget, or who actually pays the sum?
The school budget pays it.
Just on 5.2. What's the level for testing whether or not there's any doubt as to whether or not a payment constitutes special severance payment that would trigger employment law advice? Why would you be in doubt as to whether or not it was a special severance payment?
Again, it will depend on individual cases. Some in the past where we've done a settlement agreement or a special severance payment is for a very low amount that's very obvious, or payment in lieu of notice, for example, which can be classed as a special severance payment. So there is some very clear cases where it is that we wouldn't need a specialist employment law advisor. I say that our internal employment lawyer is involved in all cases, so we do get that legal advice on all cases, and we would take external legal advice on the kind of chief officer ones and any more complex cases.
Okay, thanks. So, sorry, so what, a bit slow, but so what would be the kind of case that is dubious? What are you saying, pay in lieu of notice, or well, in what kind of case would be?
So again, yeah, kind of talking on any examples. So in some instances, there may be that previously, or there may be instances where you're mutually terminating somebody's employment, and we agree to pay them in lieu of notice. So we give them their up-month notice payments. That would be classed as a special severance payment because that's not contractable. So in terms of pile-on, you could leave them on the books for the whole period, but sometimes it's in the best interest to end that contractual relationship through that settlement agreement.
Okay, thanks. And on 5.4, why would we, and on page 19, oh no, sorry, where am I up to? Yeah, 5.4, page 19. Why would we pay gifts or honorariums? In what circumstances would we do that?
So we wouldn't, and that's not normal practice for us, but we've included this as we based it on the government guidance. So it's been included in there as a kind of catch-all.
So this is effectively, this is like a list of everything you can think of that might fall under that category when we wouldn't make payments.
Yeah, that's following the government guidance, so we've included it as a full list. That's not necessarily what we do as custom practice at the council.
It's helpful to clarify that point.
Could we not look as a council to taking that out?
So taking what out?
The expressly saying that we may pay people gifts.
It doesn't say that, it says it won't. They're likely to constitute special severance payments if that were to be the case. Do you mean take it?
Yeah.
If we take it out.
So that we're not giving people gifts.
So the question is, if you take it out, then that implies that it may be acceptable and not a special payment that has to go through the process.
In what circumstances would it be acceptable? That would then be a bung, wouldn't it? That would be illegal.
It's in there from kind of the national guidance that we've used. We've covered that, and they've included it. I don't think it adds anything to remove it. Personally, I think it future-proofs anything in terms of a guidance document for the council to use.
I think particularly since we've reached this point discussing it, to remove it might send the wrong message that for some reason we think that could be acceptable.
If you took that out, if you were ever in a situation where you had an honorarium to a member of staff, you would be able to pay them that. times 10 as a settlement agreement, and it wouldn't class, and it wouldn't have to come to
Have to come through that
SMU because
special
you've taken it
process.
out of this process. You could just go, there you go. I can't think of an example. I don't know, if you were paying £2,000 a year to the deputy chief executive or whatever as an agreement to do that role, you would then be able to pay that as part of the settlement agreement without it coming to this process because you've taken it out of the list of special severance payments.
How would you be able to pay that?
It would go through the settlement agreement process, but it wouldn't come through, it wouldn't mention in here because you've listed it as not being a special severance payment.
Well, no, because we're pretty clear on what compromises the settlement agreement. That's pretty clear in this document, and it's all the statutory payments. Now, clearly, that wouldn't be a statutory payment or a contractually entitled payment. That would be a bung. Well, why would we be worried about us giving people a bung? You know, all I'm saying is that this says that in here we will count as part of special severance payments, honorarium payments or gifts. And I'm just saying, well, why would we ever pay those?
When I was made redundant from a job in Greenwich, they offered that I could take my car if I wanted. Now that would be a gift. So that's a possibility.
And my question is, why would we do that?
So we wouldn't necessarily, but that if in the event that that was to happen, then it would need to come through this process to be able to give that gift as part of any settlement or exit strategy. So by excluding it from this list, somebody could just give them that without it coming through this scrutiny.
Yeah, but with all due respect, really, if somebody wants to illegally bung somebody something, they can do that anytime, can't they? It's not, you know, it's kind of, that would just be illegal, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be part of a settlement agreement or anything. But I can see we're not going to get anywhere on this. So just on the record, I don't think we should be giving people gifts as they leave.
On the record, just be clear that we're not proposing that. It's never been suggested.
It's there as a potential special severance payment. It's there on the list. Okay, next question. In terms of 5.5, I've never really got my head around pension strain payments. So how much do we have to pay and how much do we not have to pay when it comes to paying the pension, the future pensions of people as they leave?
So that's probably for a different session, Councillor Cockburn. So that's all within our pension discretions policy that came signed off by this committee a few months ago. And if it's within the pension discretions, then there's a requirement that we need to pay if the decision is made that that person exit and they're subjected to a pension discretion.
So somebody could have something in their contract that said that they were entitled to X amount of pension, and we'd have to pay that.
So again, it's all detailed in the pension discretion and through the local government pension scheme. For example, if you're made redundant at 55 and before 60, then you get the pension discretion, which enhances your pension till you're age 60. And if the decision is made to make that person redundant, then they're entitled to that under the local government pension scheme regulations.
And that's a set amount. It can't be raised or lowered by us as an employer.
That amount is dependent upon the individual, their age, their salary, their pension, their continuous service. There are a number of factors. It's not a set amount. It's dependent upon individual circumstances.
So basically what that's there for, just to clarify what you're saying, that is there if there is some discretion within the amount, if somebody is, say, for example, in a redundancy situation, if there's some discretion, then that discretion could constitute a special severance payment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and again, under that pension discretions policy that you all received here, anything for chief officers in terms of pension discretion would come to this committee for approval.
Is that clear for you?
Yeah. Just under 642 on page 20. In terms of the special severance payments, there are a list of people there who need to approve it. So if any one of those was to say no, it wouldn't be approved. Is that right?
Not necessarily. So it would go through all of those. So what generally happens in these instances is there's so if we exclude kind of the chief officer level ones, work is ongoing between the head of service, the HR person, the finance person, in terms of looking at where we are with each case and what's happening, where we've got to, is there a tribunal case? So all those people are generally involved prior to that. It would then go up to the approval process, is the head of paid service, chief finance officer and monitoring officer.
Sorry, Trudy, so is that, so nobody in the process has a veto on it? That's what you're saying?
Excuse me, sorry, my throat's gone a bit dry. Not until it gets to the kind of the 3 statutory officer sign-offs.
So if any payment was subsequently found to be unlawful, is it just the 3 statutory officers that could potentially face prosecution, or would it be everybody who's in the chain? Might be one for Rachel, I don't know.
I'm not in a position to answer that. I don't know.
I'm not really in a position to answer either. I'm not in legal anymore. I think it would be wrong of me to provide legal advice. This isn't my area of expertise.
So obviously, if there are unanswered questions you want to pose afterwards, Pete, you can pass those through in response.
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, it is quite important that we establish where the legal responsibility lies for payments, especially if they are subsequently found to be unlawful. On that issue, within the scheme, why doesn't the leader of the council sign off each payment, unless of course it's involving the leader, in which case they shouldn't, but why isn't the leader of the council involved in the process?
So the ones, so obviously the head of paid service is got the responsibility, delegate responsibility for staffing across the whole council. There's special kind of the different measures are in there for chief officer, where it affects the chief officer, and that's where staffing matters and urgency are included. So in terms of the underneath chief officer, it's the head of paid service who has the delegated responsibility for anything affecting staff. We've included the executive member in there following the kind of 2019 discussions to make sure that a member has that kind of oversight and knows what's going on. And then any chief officer ones, the leader as part of the staffing matters and urgency committee would have that oversight.
So I guess it's a question for the committee. Are you happy with it being at executive level rather than leader level?
I mean, as you've noted, it's actually just a check and balance in the system. It's not the decision making. So in terms of chief officer level, it is the leader of the council that makes the decision. So we're only talking about anybody at below assistant director level in terms of that payoff. And then that decision maker is actually the chief operating officer that will actually be making that decision.
Yeah.
So the question is it better to ask the leader or ask the executive member for their views on that process prior to it going to the chief operating officer to make a decision? I'm not particularly either way. I would suggest the exec member probably knows more about the service than the leader would in terms of what's happening at that kind of level, but I'm comfortable. I think the process as written is the better one in terms of that. Whether you want to put any additional levels in there is entirely up to you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other Rachel?
Okay. Just in terms of, can you explain to me, sorry, again, being a bit thick, but on 6.73, one of the potential business reasons given for a special severance payment is to settle a grievance. I mean, there's a procedure for settling grievances, shouldn't there? And they shouldn't necessarily result in a payout. Why would we use cash to settle a grievance? Again,
it's on individual cases. It depends on the circumstances at the time and whether a settlement would be appropriate. I think from this guidance, the underpinning thing is this should be the last resort and not standard practice. Therefore, you're right, Councillor Kilburn, there is a grievance process to go through. And as we said earlier on in the discussion, this shouldn't be seen as a soft option to mitigate following any of the kind of internal processes. But again, it's all on individual cases. So I think not to include that as just as an example, to include that in the guidance document, I think is suitable.
Okay, thanks. It was just that I'm really struggling to think of a grievance that could warrant a special severance payment that wasn't already covered by sort of whistleblowing stuff or health and safety at work legislation, or all of those sort of protected rights. Really, I mean, I think you can see by the time a grievance has got to a tribunal, then there may be negotiations with the employee in order to try and settle the situation. But I'm really struggling to think of any sort of grievance, unless the grievance was the other way around, of course, but that's another issue. Okay, just on 6.17, making sure that individuals within the council who are subject to complaints brought by an employee play absolutely no role in deciding whether or not special severance payment should be made to that employee. I don't know if because so much of this is pertinent to Councillor Ashton, that's the reason for his absence tonight. I've no idea. But is this the thing that answers the PIR complaint that Councillor Ashton should not have taken part in the meeting that agreed to pay off the previous chief executive who had a tribunal complaint against him personally? Is this the bit that will stop that happening again?
I don't know if you want to respond
So
to that.
I'm not commenting on previous cases. I think that's included in the guidance to make it clear who's to be involved in future.
I mean, I think that the statement there speaks for itself. Pete, you can read what you want into it, but but obviously we have the benefit of hindsight with a particular case. But as I said previously, the purpose of this is to have a comprehensive policy which doesn't just fight the last battle, but looks to put in place good practice, anticipating all possible scenarios that we might face in the future. So we're not just sort of designing something which just responds to the PIR, but other than recommendations that we need to improve the whole process.
Again, with all due respect to Councillor de Gorm, we are fighting the last battle, because the whole reason that we have this process here now is because we experienced the PIR following the last battle. So I think, and hindsight has been useful. Things have emerged since, but there was also a lot of foresight before that decision was made, and people were informed as to the nature of what was going on before the meetings. But be that as it may, it is a reasonable test to say, would this clause in our procedure have stopped Councillor Ashton attending that meeting? Because that's what the PIR is about, and that's what this is supposed to achieve. So I'm looking for an answer from anybody around this table, whether or not this clause would have prohibited Councillor Ashton from attending the meeting that agreed to pay off the former chief exec.
In all fairness, Pete, let's not just use an excuse to keep saying the same thing over and over again. You can read that clause. The clause is quite clear. The answer to the question is quite clear. You know the answer to the question.
Are you going through the chair, Nigel, or are we going to have a sliding match?
Can we?
So is it my turn, Chair? I'm repeating it because nobody's answered the question yet. Would this stop Councillor Ashton attending that meeting?
I mean, the answer is yes. And if you can't read that from paragraph 6.17, I question your comprehension skills.
I think, can we try and keep the meeting sort of civilised and appreciate it is a contentious issue. Pete, do you have other questions you want to ask?
I am being civilised, to be honest.
Do you have other questions? I didn't say who wasn't being civilised. I just said let's be civilised. So do you have other questions you want to ask, Pete?
I think for now that's it.
Councillor Eyre, do you want to speak?
Go through some more mundane stuff for you, Trudy. Page 39, numbers 6 and 7. I thought they were for member approval. It's the market supplements and the more recent one around business critical retention payments. I thought you required member approvals to go out for any market supplements. It only ever really applied to DCS.
So it would be member approval for chief officer levels.
It doesn't say
Doesn't say
that
that
anywhere
there,
on page 39.
Yeah, we can make amendments for that. Yeah.
And is that the same on, I was there last time, so I should have known, the business critical retention payments, is that member as well, or was that?
Yeah, so it was member approval to do it. I think probably what we've included in here is just the reference to non-chief officers, so I can add that in for both the market supplements and business critical retention payments for it to come to this committee for chief officers and above, ADs and above.
So it's not a member decision if it's below chief officer level instead of business critical?
No.
Okay. Can't criticise that because it was just the made the decisions that it's wrong. That one's...
I think you agreed, so the paper that we brought last time was to agree the ability as a policy to have emergency retention payments. So we've agreed as a committee that that's a kind of option to be able to pay that. So you've agreed that overall, and then you're going to be monitoring them in terms of if we pay any, it comes back to this group to monitor.
Page 22, paragraph 613. I think it's just a wording thing. 613 doesn't seem to correspond to 6.42 on page 20. I think I get it on the basis that the decision makers are either the head of paid service or SMU.
Yes, I think it's given by. So yes, I think I've tried to include, so for non-chief officers, it's statutory officers or staffing matters and urgency for chief officers.
Which is sort of 613 doesn't refer to all the steps in 6.4.2. Makes it.
.4.
6.13 basically says it's either the statutory officer or it's SMU.
So again,
Whereas 6.42 goes through all of the various different, basically includes the exec member.
yeah, so again, I could probably make it clearer in that document. So before it even gets to statutory officers, those that are involved in the actual case at the kind of day-to-day level have had all that discussion and talked about the case and got the parameters, and the exec members being included in that kind of detail, and then it would go up to for approval at statutory officer or come into this committee for chief officer.
Just on that, how is it decided whether it goes to SMU or statutory officer?
AD level above is SMU, anything below is head of paid service.
So is that?
We've said that without moving your lips, Trudy.
Is that spelled out somewhere through?
So yeah, so in the definitions on page 14, it says about chief officer in there, about what it is. So when we referred through the document for chief officer, it's clear that it's assistant directors, directors, corporate directors, and the chief operating officers.
You happy with that? That's all right.
I did find the other one. Page 13, the definition on confidentiality clause only goes one way. The document itself actually does articulate that confidentiality clauses go both ways. I just wasn't sure why that one doesn't.
Okay, we can amend that.
Because equally, they shouldn't be disclosing. We shouldn't be disclosing things about them as much as they shouldn't be disclosing things about us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions? Councillor Hook, did you have any other questions you wanted to ask? Okay, thank you. Pete, have you got any other questions you wanted to?
No, that's me, thanks.
So with those, are we happy with the sort of amendments that have been noted? I'm sure that Ken will want to check with Trudy for the precise details, but you can always check back on what was said. So with those corrections or alterations that have been noted, is the committee happy to approve the recommendations which have been said are on page 5 and 6, paragraph 5. Is there anything that needs to be added to that, Trudy, since in the light of the conversations?
I don't think so on those recommendations, except to make the amendments to the guidance document as we've discussed.
Okay. I see all those in favour of the recommendations. Yeah. Any against? Okay, thank you. That's carried clearly. Majority support those recommendations. So that moves us on then to next item, which is item 6, People Directorate, appointment of subcommittee for appointment of corporate people, Director of People and cover for current vacancies.
A bit of a mouthful on a title for you. See how many words I forget as a title. So this is following the resignation of the current Corporate Director of People Services. This paper makes the proposals to permanently recruit to the post. And for this committee to have some assurances over the kind of cover arrangements within People Directorate. So it's seeking to approve the appointment subcommittee for this appointment. Just for noting, I did seek approval outside of the committee to start the recruitment process from committee members so that we didn't lose time. Obviously, it would have been a key position. So the advert is currently out and active. Obviously, if there's a decision at this committee that changes that, then we can obviously amend and pull the advert if that's required. Background to it then, so the senior management structure was agreed by this committee in December 2020, so the role is proposed to go out, is out for advert as a like-for-like replacement and no changes to it. The current director has left employment, well, she leaves at the end of October officially, but due to annual leave has already left. We're seeking permission to replace. Just onto page 48 then, in terms of the interim arrangements to cover the vacancies in People. So the committee are aware that the current Assistant Director of Children's Social Care leaves the organisation on the 5th of November. The committee's had a previous report seeking to recruit to that on a permanent basis, and the selection process takes place on the 20th and 22nd of October. The expectation is that appointment will be made, again with notice periods. We don't expect them to be in post until into January 2020. We've carried out a recruitment process to recruit for the interim AD, which has been appointed from within our own current staffing cohort. Those interviews were carried out on the 7th of October. I'm not in a position to, I'm not sure whether I can name that successful person or not. I think committee members will be aware of it from involvement on the panel, and I can circulate that information afterwards and make sure at the next meeting we get an update in terms of names. The decision's been taken to not cover the corporate director of people in its entirety, and in the interim period until a replacement commences, the chief operating officer will directly line manage the director of safeguarding, the Director of Prevention and Commissioning, and the interim Director of Children's Services, so the interim DCS. And Coyle has commenced on an interim basis to cover that DCS role from the 1st of October, and did work with the Corporate Director of People for a handover. Michael Melvin, who's the Director of Safeguarding, will take over as the DAS, so the Director of Adult Services, the statutory role from today on that same basis. Amanda Jones, so again, the committee approved the recruitment of Assistant Director for Adult Services, which was Michael Melvin's previous role, so when he was promoted, and Amanda Jones joins us on the 15th of November. So we're confident now in terms of the cover arrangements within the People Directorate are sufficient in this interim period. Details are on the remuneration package for the Corporate Director of People in line with our current pay policy. We have had some evidence that the market for this role is tight and that other authorities' remuneration is higher. Again, it might be that we need to come back to this committee or the subcommittee around if we've been unable to attract anybody. However, previous roles we've always managed at York to attract candidates to our chief officer positions. So again, it's to be made up of two. So the appointments committee to be made up of 2 members of Lib Dems and 1 from Labour, and to attract the strongest field of candidates with the right knowledge, we've used an external recruitment consultancy agency. We did get 3 quotes this time to make sure that we're still getting value for money. And as part of that, we've progressed with Resource and Solutions, who are our neighbouring authority, to support this, and that work has already commenced. I'll leave it at that in terms of the report, Chair. It does include the role profile that's active, so it's for this committee to agree to appoint a subcommittee or any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or points? Councillor Eyre.
I've got a few of the other papers as well, but I'll ask it on this particular one. Power 27 on the financials, including with on costs. I always used to work on a roughly 1.5 ratio in terms of salary to on costs. This is way below that. It seems quite low.
I didn't make it up myself, you'd be glad to know. I did ask a professional, but I did ask finance for that information, but I can, I'll double check it, Councillor.
Assuming it includes pension and NI. Just seems, as a rule of thumb, I always used to work on 1.5 times salary is, gives you a rough indication of what, without going through all that.
I do.
And then is going up as well, so I mean that's another 2% on top of whatever that was. 30,000, isn't it?
Okay. Any other questions?
Just the issue that had been raised previously, really, in terms of would have been good to see some specific reference to improving the Ofsted rating in terms of looked after children in the city as one of the most vital things that the new person would see. I know it's in there in terms of safeguarding, etc., but it would have been good to see explicitly as part of the role profile of improving that Ofsted performance. I don't think Ofsted's named here actually, but just for noting, really.
Noted. So if there's no further, I don't have any questions on this. So the recommendation on paragraph 29 is to establish appointments subcommittee for the appointments and delegate powers for the subcommittee to conduct recruitment process on the basis as has been identified through proportionality of 2 Liberal Democrats and 1 Labour for the subcommittee. Is everyone happy with that recommendation? Seeing nods. Sorry.
Can I just ask for nominations to be sent as soon as possible? I'll chase up with an email afterwards.
Okay. Thank you. So that then takes us on to item 7 on page 59, changes to membership of committees, joint committees.
That's me.
You. Rachel.
Okay, so members will recall annual council meeting on the 27th of May where appointments were made to committees, subcommittees, outside bodies for this municipal year. Further changes are required in year as set out in this report. To summarise, there are proposed changes to 2 committees. So the first committee is Children, Education and Communities Policy and Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Baker has indicated she wishes to step down as chair but remain on the committee as a member. The Liberal Democrats have a spare space for a substitute on that committee. They didn't fill it in May at the beginning of the municipal year, so it's proposed that Councillor Orrell be removed as a member of the committee and appointed as substitute, and Councillor Daubney be appointed as a member of the committee. And it's proposed that Councillor Daubney be appointed chair of that committee. The second committee is Customer and Corporate Services Scrutiny Management Committee. Councillor Hook is currently a member of the committee and Councillor Orrell is a substitute. It's proposed that those 2 roles switch. So Councillor Hook would be a substitute, Councillor Orrell would be a full member of the committee. Recommendations are at paragraph 9 on page 61, where the committee is asked to consider and approve the changes to the committee and outside body appointments as set out in paragraph 2.
Thank you. And obviously, as you'll notice, it's disappointing that Councillor Baker is not able to continue on in that role, but obviously understand the circumstances. So the recommendations are as before us. Does anyone wish to say anything? Councillor Kilbane?
No, thanks, Chair. Obviously, we have long-standing issues with proportionality on the council, which still remain in part. Some have been addressed, but some others still remain, and I don't particularly want to rehearse those arguments again here tonight. What I am concerned about, though, is the amount of Lib Dem councillors who are now in receipt of, who will, once this goes through, and nothing against Councillor Daubney, he's a lovely fella, but once this goes through, just under 3/4 of Lib Dem councillors will be in receipt of a special responsibility allowance. And as a rule of thumb, working out if they're paying 10% of that allowance into their campaign fighting funds, that means around about £20,000 per annum going into the Lib Dem political campaign fund through the appointment by the leader of the councillors to positions that hold special responsibility allowances. For the record, for this particular appointment, we did suggest that somebody that was maybe more suitably qualified could take the chair, but that suggestion was declined. Again, nothing against Councillor Daubney. I'm sure he'll do a fine job, but I am alarmed at the amount of SRAs that the Lib Dems are drawing down, which will be directly used for their political campaigning.
Your comments are noted. Councillor Eyre.
I will absorb, I will note that the last Labour administration did a very similar thing. In fact, they even took the chair of corporate scrutiny management themselves, and that didn't work out so well for them at the election for that fighting fund.
Yeah,
You may have noticed we're under new management.
I think we have before us a recommendation, and we note the comments that have been concerned, which relate to discussion outside of the remit of this committee. So if we can still vote in favour of this recommendation, please. Yeah. Thank you. Any against? Thank you. Noted. So we'll move on to item Item 8 is the work plan.
So all I was going to recommend was that for the 20th of December, one was for you to receive an update on the people services recruitment for this committee. Christmas. Christmas time. So it's whether you wanted to kind of formulate on the work plan to get a formal update. So the recruitment processes should have concluded by then, so you should know then start dates.
Happy to have that and the mince pie. Any other amendments that people want to propose? No, see none. So we're happy to approve that. Yeah. Thank you. So that takes me then to agenda item 9. I don't think we've got any papers for them. Oh, I see. Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
It has just dawned on me, Chair, as we were looking at that and realising that Trudy's loading December because she won't be here for that particular meeting, that we should probably note our thanks. I think it will be Trudy's last meeting. So
Right, I think
for the committee
sure
to note our thanks to Trudy.
the whole committee would appreciate that.
Thank you.
We will miss you, I'm sure. So I have no other urgent business. So at that point, we conclude the public session to deal with item 10 and 11 in private session.